The linguistic niche hypothesis, or NLH, posits that the exotericity of languages, how prevalent non-native speakers are, and grammatical complexity are inversely related, which the NLH ascribes to attrition of complex grammatical rules as more non-native speakers adopt the language, but fail to acquire those rules. Focusing on two characteristics that are positive indices of grammatical complexity: fusion, when new phonemes arise from the merger of previously distinct ones, and informativity, language's capacity for meaningful variation. Olena Shcherbakova and colleagues conducted a quantitative analysis for more than 1,300 languages and claim the outcome is inconsistent with the NLH. Which finding, if true, would most directly support Shcherbakova and colleagues' claim? A. Shcherbakova and colleagues' analysis showed a slightly negative correlation between grammatical complexity and fusion, and between grammatical complexity and informativity. B. Shcherbakova and colleagues' analysis showed a slightly negative correlation between grammatical complexity and exotericity. C. Shcherbakova and colleagues' analysis showed a slightly positive correlation between grammatical complexity and fusion. D. Shcherbakova and colleagues' analysis showed a slightly positive correlation between fusion and exotericity and between informativity and exotericity.
So question number 15, we are talking about linguistic niche hypothesis, LNH. So this posits that the exotericity of languages, that is how prevalent non-native speakers are, and grammatical complexity are inversely related. Now this word posit has come many times on the SAT, so we will have first a look at its meaning. So posit is put forward as fact or as a basis for argument. A statement which is made on the assumption that it will prove to be true. So some kind of a hypothesis it is. It is given as, in fact it is given as a fact or as a basis for argument. So same way over here the L and H, it proposes or it gives an idea that the exotericity of languages, that means how prevalent or how widespread, and grammatical complexity are inversely related. That means that if the grammatical complexity of the language is too much, then it will not be that widespread, because it's mentioned that they are inversely related. So basically if the language is easy, grammar is easy in that language, it will be more widespread. But if the grammar is complex, the language will be less widespread. So the exotericity, the language will be more prevalent if the grammatical complexity is less, because they are inversely related. That's what the LNH proposes. Then which the LNH ascribes to attrition of complex grammatical rules as more non-native speakers adopt the language but fail to acquire those rules. So many non-native speakers of any language will try to gain the language or adopt the language, but they will not be able to apply the rules very effectively. That's what the LNH claims. Now, however, we are then talking about Olena Shcherbakova. She has in fact conducted a quantitative analysis for more than 1,300 languages. And what she is claiming that the outcome is inconsistent with the LNH. So what the LNH is proposing is not consistent with the quantitative analysis experiment which she did. And what have they studied? So if you observe that they are studying two positive indices of grammatical complexity. So this is what they are saying is inversely proportional to exotericity. This grammatical complexity. So but there are two parts of that grammatical complexity which they are studying. One is fusion. This is one thing they are studying. And the other one is informativity. So these are the two things under grammatical complexity which they study for this experiment. Now, as per the question, which finding, if true, would most directly support Shcherbakova and colleagues' claim? So we need out of these four answers which will support her claim. So A says Shcherbakova and colleagues' analysis showed a slightly negative correlation between grammatical complexity and fusion, and between grammatical complexity and informativity. But grammatic complexity, these are the two parts. Fusion and informativity are actually the parts of, or they are the positive indices of grammatical complexity itself. So it's not showing negative correlation with that. It is showing negative correlation with exotericity, these two things. So this A is not correct. And B is also not correct. Shcherbakova and colleagues' analysis showed a slightly negative correlation between grammatical complexity and exotericity. This is already said by LNH actually, that grammatical complexity and exotericity are negatively correlated or inversely correlated. That's what it already says, the LNH. So there is a negative correlation. But what she is saying is that it's inconsistent. So it cannot be B. C says Shcherbakova and colleagues' analysis showed a slightly positive correlation between grammatical complexity and fusion. But as I said, grammatical complexity, fusion is a part of that grammatical complexity itself. It's one of the indices, positive indices of grammatical complexity itself. So whatever we show, we have to show between exotericity and grammatical complexity, and or its two parts. So that's why choice D is the best answer. Shcherbakova and colleagues' analysis showed a slightly positive correlation between fusion, which is one of the parts of the grammatical complexity. Between this and this, there is a positive correlation, and even between informativity and exotericity. That means the other part of the same thing, that is other part of the grammatical complexity, informativity and exotericity, also it is showing a positive correlation. So we'll have to go with D. So choice D is the best answer because it presents a finding that, if true, would support Shcherbakova and colleagues' claim that the outcome of their study is inconsistent with the linguistic niche hypothesis, LNH. The text explains that the LNH holds that there is an inverse relationship between the prevalence of non-native speakers of the language, that is exotericity, and the grammatical complexity of that language. That is, as the number of non-native speakers increases, grammatical complexity decreases, and vice versa. Then according to the text, Shcherbakova and colleagues focused on two positive indications of grammatical complexity, fusion and informativity, and analyzed their occurrence in over 1,300 languages. Then if the researchers found a slightly positive correlation between fusion and exotericity and between informity and exotericity, meaning that to some extent grammatical complexity increases as the number of non-native speakers of a language increases. So their outcome would not be consistent with the assumption that exotericity and grammatical complexity are inversely related as per the LNH.
Choice A is incorrect because it wouldn't be possible to say that a finding of a slightly negative correlation between grammatical complexity and both fusion and informativity is inconsistent or consistent with the LNH, since the finding would address only grammatical complexity, given that fusion and informativity are aspects of grammatical complexity, and wouldn't move beyond that factor to address its relationship to the prevalence of non-native speakers of a language, exotericity, which is the relationship the LNH focuses on. Choice B is incorrect because a finding of a slightly negative correlation between grammatical complexity and the prevalence of non-native speakers of a language, exotericity, meaning that as the number of non-native speakers increases, grammatical complexity somewhat decreases, and vice versa, would be consistent, not inconsistent with the LNH, since the text indicates that according to the LNH, there is an inverse relationship between grammatical complexity and exotericity. A negative correlation reflects an inverse relationship. Choice C is incorrect because it wouldn't be possible to say that a finding of a slightly positive correlation between grammatical complexity and fusion is inconsistent or consistent with the LNH, since the finding would address only grammatical complexity, given that fusion is a positive indication of grammatical complexity, and wouldn't move beyond that factor to address its relationship to the prevalence of non-native speakers of a language, exotericity, which is the relationship the LNH focuses on.